I still remember the feel of the soil beneath my nails. Not dirty, just honest. The kind of earth that holds warmth, even in the early morning cool. I used to start my days in the garden behind my little house. Just me, the tomatoes, and the quiet kind of peace that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. My husband, Henry, had always said that plants grow better when you talk to them. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it soft, like it was something he believed deep in his bones. So I'd talk to them, to the tomatoes, to the basil, to the climbing beans that always tangled themselves in the fence. And in those mornings, I never felt alone. Henry's trowel was still hanging from the hook under the kitchen window, its handle worn smooth from his hand, then mine. Sometimes I would catch myself holding it just to feel that familiar shape. A small thing, but small things can be anchors. I didn't know it would be the last season I would plant. I didn't know that winter was already on its way, not just outside, in the air, but into my life. If I had known, if I had understood what I was giving up, I might have held on a little tighter. I might have taken one more slow morning among those vines, one more cup of coffee with the sun coming in warm over the fence, one more quiet moment where life still felt like mine. But I didn't know. And that's where everything begins. It started on a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the light comes in low through the window and settles across the floor in long, slow stripes. I had just come in from pruning the tomatoes, my knees a little stiff, but my heart good and quiet. My son, Daniel, called and asked if he could stop by. He said it in that voice people use when they've rehearsed something. Too cheerful, too careful. He brought his wife, Emily, and the children. Everyone acting just a touch too polite, like the air in the room had been arranged ahead of them. We sat at my small kitchen table, where the wood is worn down smooth from years of elbows and cups and quiet morning breakfasts. Emily kept complimenting everything: the curtains, the teapot, the garden outside. But her eyes didn't stay on anything for more than a second. They were searching for a place to land. Daniel took my hand. Not gently, not harshly, just deliberately. "Mom," he said, "we've been thinking." Those words are never followed by something simple. He told me the house was getting too difficult for me to maintain, that winters were only going to get harder, that the stairs were a risk, that being alone wasn't good for someone my age. He said it like a kindness, a son looking out for his mother. Emily reached across the table and smiled like she was offering me a gift. "We want you to come live with us. We're planning to build a beautiful in-law suite, your own space, privacy, family close by. The kids will love having you there." They made it sound warm, safe, like belonging. And then Daniel said the real part, the part tucked in the middle like it might go unnoticed. "If we use the money from selling this place, we can finish the new suite sooner. It'll be perfect for you, Mom." I looked out the window at my garden. The tomatoes were still turning toward the sun. I didn't answer right away. But winter had already stepped through the door. The decision didn't happen in one moment. It happened in the quiet spaces between conversations, in the pauses after phone calls, in the way I caught myself staring out the kitchen window longer than usual, feeling something shifting that I couldn't quite name. I told myself it made sense. The house was old. The winters were colder each year. The wind came in under the doors, no matter how many blankets I rolled against the frame. And when you spend enough nights alone with your own thoughts for company, the idea of being close to family begins to sound like warmth. So I agreed. Daniel hugged me tight and thanked me. Emily clapped her hands like a plan had finally snapped into place. The children ran circles through the rooms, their voices bouncing off the walls. I watched them. I tried to imagine laughter filling the house again. But even then, there was a heaviness in my chest, a quiet voice that whispered, "This house has never been empty." The next week, I began packing. I didn't realize how much of my life lived in drawers, on shelves, tucked between cookbook pages and inside old tins. Letters from Henry, birthday cards in faded envelopes, a recipe written in his handwriting for tomato soup we made every summer. I wrapped the framed wedding photo in newspaper. The paper crackled like dry leaves. I boxed my garden tools last, not because they were least important, but because they were the hardest to lift. Henry's trowel still had the soil of our last harvest in the grooves. I brushed it clean with my thumb, not to wipe it away, but to remember. I closed each box slowly, like sealing a chapter I wasn't ready to finish. On the final morning, I stood in the garden and breathed in deep. It smelled of sun-warmed earth and something like forgiveness. "I'll find you again," I whispered. I don't know if I was speaking to Henry or the tomatoes or some part of myself I feared I was leaving behind, but I believed it. I really did, at least in that moment. The weeks after I sold the house felt strange, like I was walking through rooms that didn't belong to me anymore, even when I was still living in them. Every time I opened a drawer or watered the plants, I reminded myself it was temporary, that soon I would have a new space, a place in a home full of family, a place where I would be wanted. Daniel sent me pictures of the in-law suite as it was being built. Studs of raw wood framed in neat rectangles, a window looking out over their backyard, fresh drywall still unpainted. He told me how excited he was, how good this was going to be for all of us, how the kids wouldn't have to miss me anymore. I wanted to believe every word, but the waiting stretched longer than expected. There were delays. Just a few weeks, Daniel said, then a month, then 2. I stayed with them while the finishing work dragged on. They made a space for me in the guest room, not unkindly, not thoughtlessly, just practically. I folded my clothes into drawers that already smelled like someone else's detergent. I kept my toiletries in a small basket I could move out of the way quickly so I wouldn't be inconvenienced. The children were happy to have me there. They climbed into my lap without hesitation, held my hands when we crossed the kitchen floor. Their laughter filled the space where my own used to live. Emily was friendly in a brisk, efficient sort of way, always moving, always managing something. Her compliments had softened into instructions. "Mom, could you watch them while I run out? Mom, dinner needs stirring. Mom, the dishwasher needs unloading." Daniel, when he was home, kissed my cheek and told me how grateful he was. He meant it, at least in the ways that mattered to him. But I began to notice something. My garden tools weren't in the trunk where I had placed them. The box they were packed in wasn't in the garage. When I asked, Emily laughed lightly and said, "Oh, those old things? They were worn out. We didn't think you'd need them here." She said it casually, like it was obvious, like it was nothing at all. I nodded slowly, but Henry's trowel had been in that box, and something in my chest went very, very still. The in-law suite was finished in early winter, the kind of winter where the cold sits low to the ground, heavy and unmoving. Daniel stood in the doorway, smiling wide, proud of what he'd built, and I tried to smile back. I did. The walls were freshly painted. The floors were new and smooth. There was a small sitting area, a bedroom, and a bathroom all to myself. It was nice. Nice in the way a guest room in a hotel is nice. Clean, orderly. Not mine. There were no shelves for my photos, no hooks for my apron, no place to plant herbs near the window. But I told myself that meaning would come with time. Emily walked me through everything as if she were giving a tour, where I could put my clothes, which shelves were for my things, how the thermostat was set and not to be adjusted, when the kids napped so I'd know when to keep quiet. She didn't say it cruelly, just as policy. Daniel kissed my forehead and told me I was home. And I wanted so badly for that to be true. The first week was gentle. They made dinner most nights. We sat together, we laughed. The children pulled me into their games and stories, but I began to notice small things. When Emily cooked, she handed me the cutting board and knife without asking. When the laundry buzzer sounded, she called my name before she stood up. When the baby woke early, it was my footsteps that moved down the hallway. None of it felt like a request, just the shape the house settled into. One morning, as I reached for a mug, Emily lightly touched my wrist. "Oh, we use those for guests. The plain ones in the bottom cabinet are for every day." She said it with a smile, but something in me folded in on itself, just a little. Another day, Daniel asked if I could pick the kids up from school. Then the next day, and the next. I started keeping track of the household schedule without meaning to. Nap times, snack times, bath routines. I learned the rhythm of the house the way one learns a job. Except no one ever called it that. At night, I would lie in my bed in the suite, listening to the hum of the thermostat I wasn't allowed to touch. And I would think about my garden, the good earth, the slow mornings, the life that had belonged to me. And the house felt colder than winter. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It starts with a favor here, a small kindness there. You don't notice you've crossed a line until you look back and realize you can't remember when you stepped over it. One morning, Emily was running late for work. She rushed past me in the hallway, hair still half pinned, a child tugging on her sleeve. "Mom, would you mind making breakfast?" She said it like breathing, like it was already done. Of course I made breakfast. The next day, she didn't ask. She just placed the pan on the stove and walked away. And so it became mine. Then laundry, then dishes, then the school pickup, then the bedtime routine. Not because we talked about it, not because anyone decided, just because I was there. Because mom has time, because mom's home, because mom can handle it. Emily started introducing me to friends as, "Oh, this is Daniel's mother. She helps us with the kids." Helps. That word sat in my chest like a stone. Daniel would come home in the evenings, tired from work, kiss the children on the head, say he appreciated me, without asking how I was. He never meant to be unkind, but kindness requires noticing, and he didn't look closely enough to see what was happening. One afternoon, I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, on my knees, like I hadn't done since I was 26 and we were newly married, and laughing about how clumsy we were with housekeeping. And I felt something shift in me. Not break, just shift. A tiredness that wasn't physical, a quiet knowing. I looked down at my hands that had once tended tomatoes, hands my husband held when we walked the garden path, hands that had been warm with purpose. They were red and raw from dish soap. That night, when I went to bed, the sheets felt cold, not from temperature, just empty. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last day I had done something simply because I wanted to. I couldn't. And that realization was its own kind of winter.
There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people. It doesn't shout. It settles, like dust on unused shelves. I began waking before everyone else, not because I meant to, but because my sleep had grown shallow. I would stand at the small window in my suite, holding a mug of the keeper coffee they bought for every day, watching the frost crawl across the grass in their backyard. No garden, no soil, just white stillness. My days filled themselves without me deciding anything. Breakfast, lunches packed, school pickup, laundry folding, dinner stirring. I had become the quiet rhythm of the house, the invisible hands. And still, no one asked what I wanted to do with my days. The phone rang less. Friends I used to see for coffee on Thursdays called it first. I always said, "Oh, this week is busy. Maybe next." Next never came. Over time, they stopped asking. I told myself it was fine, that I had family now, that this was better than being alone. But there were moments, small, sharp ones, that told the truth. The day I opened the pantry and found the tin where I kept my tea replaced with a plastic container labeled Grandma. Not my name, a category. The evening I set my book on the living room table and found it later placed back in my room. Door closed. No one said anything. They didn't have to. I was a guest in the house I lived in. One afternoon, I found one of the children's drawings taped to the fridge. A stick figure family, Daddy, Mommy, 2 little ones, and me, in the corner, holding a broom. I stood there for a long moment, not angry, just quiet, because children see what is real, not what we pretend. That night, as I lay in bed, the house warm and full of noise just beyond my door, I felt something I had never felt in my own home, not even once. Lonely. The kind of lonely that sinks into your bones and whispers you've been gone from yourself longer than you realized. I closed my eyes, and winter settled deeper. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day. No argument, no storm. Just an ordinary, pale winter afternoon where the light felt thin. I had just finished folding the laundry. Small shirts, soft socks, little things that smelled of detergent and sunshine from the dryer vent. The youngest, Lily, was sitting on the rug in the living room, coloring. She is a gentle child, thoughtful in that way some children are, as if they can hear feelings the way others hear sound. I sat beside her, not to entertain, not to teach, just to be near someone who was still soft. She drew her family in bright crayon shapes, smiling circles for faces, hands always holding. She looked up at me suddenly, her brow furrowed in the serious way children have when they are trying to understand the world. "Grandma, do you live here? Or are you just helping us?" There was no harm in her voice, no meanness, just pure, bright honesty. The kind of honesty that doesn't know it can wound. I didn't answer right away. I felt the air around me still, like the house itself was listening. I looked at her drawing. I wasn't drawn in this one. Not at all. Not even in the corner. My hands were resting in my lap, but they
felt suddenly heavy, so heavy. I tried to speak, but the words didn't come because I didn't know the answer. Not anymore. Lily went back to coloring, content in the simplicity of her question. But for me, that moment was the sound of something inside me quietly breaking free. Not shattering, not collapsing, just loosening. I sat there for a long time, feeling something clear and cold settle into place. Not sadness, not anger, truth. I was not living there. I was serving there. And once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. That evening, I waited until the children were asleep. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the wind pressing softly against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table where I had once sat with Daniel as a boy, helping him with homework, cutting his grilled cheese into small squares so it wouldn't burn his tongue. Funny how tables remember more than people do. Daniel walked in, loosening his tie, looking tired in the way men do when life has become routine. Emily followed a moment later, her phone in hand, already half engaged in something else. I folded my hands in my lap. I made sure my voice was calm, steady, ordinary. I want to talk about the arrangement here, I said. Both of them looked up, a flicker of surprise, then something like caution. I explained slowly that I had been helping, gladly at first, that I loved the children, that I wanted to feel useful, yes, but not necessary for the household to function, that I needed time to myself again, a morning for a walk, an afternoon to read without listening for footsteps, and perhaps a small stipend, something to acknowledge that this was not just family, but labor. The words were not dramatic. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. But the silence that followed was heavy. Emily set her phone down carefully, too carefully. Her smile was thin. "Margaret," she said, "you live here. You don't pay rent. You don't pay utilities. And you want payment for helping your family?" I didn't flinch. I want my life to still belong to me. She blinked. The softness left her face. "Well," she said, with a lightness that cut sharper than anger ever could, "you have nowhere else to go, do you?" My son didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the table. And that was the moment, right there. Not the words, but his silence. I realized I was alone in that room. Not in the world, not in life, just there. In their home, where I did not live, where I only served. I didn't speak after that. Not because I didn't have words, but because there was nothing left to say. Some truths don't need arguing. They just need to be seen. I excused myself from the table as politely as if we had been discussing the weather. I walked back to my suite, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I let myself really look at the room. The careful paint, the neatly made bed, the dresser that still didn't feel like mine, the window that overlooked a yard I was not allowed to touch. A place designed for me to stay, not to belong. I realized then that I had already been disappearing. Little pieces of myself dropped behind me like crumbs on a trail no one followed. But Lily's question, Emily's words, Daniel's silence, they had shown me the last piece. So I stood up. I opened the closet, and I began to pack. Not frantically, not in grief, slowly, carefully, like I was gathering myself back up. One pair of shoes, 2 sweaters, the quilt I had sewn from Henry's old shirts, a small tin where I kept seeds from my garden. I had taken them without even realizing I'd saved something of my own. The last thing I packed was his trowel. I found it buried in a storage bin in the garage, wrapped in an old towel. They had thrown away the rest, but somehow this one had survived. I held it for a long moment. My decision was not dramatic. It did not burn or rage. It was clear, cold, still, like winter air on a quiet morning. The next day, while the house was busy with school and work and errands and noise, I made 3 calls. One to a small apartment building across town. They had a studio on the 3rd floor with a balcony that faced the morning sun. One to a moving company, just a man with a van and patient hands. And one to myself, to the part of me I thought I had lost. I'm coming back, I told her. Not out loud, but I felt her hear it. The decision was not the hard part. The hard part had been staying. I chose early morning, not to hide, not to sneak, just to keep the moment quiet. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only happens before a day has had the chance to begin. I made myself a cup of coffee, my own blend, the one I bought for myself and kept on the highest shelf. The steam rose into the cold air, and it felt like breathing again. The moving man came right on time. He spoke softly, as though he could sense the shape of the moment. He didn't ask questions. He just lifted boxes, carefully, respectfully. I had only a few. Clothes, the quilt of Henry's shirts, a handful of books, the tin of seeds, and the trowel. Things that were mine. Before I left, I wrote a note. No speeches, no explanations, no accusations. Just a truth shaped plainly. I love you, but I need my life back. I will always be your mother, but I cannot be your home. I hope one day you understand. Mom. I placed it on the kitchen table, the same table where I had once fed Daniel warm soup on winter nights, where we rolled dough for cookies when he was small, where I watched him grow, where I had tried to be needed again. I touched the surface once, not to hold on, just to say goodbye. Then I walked through the doorway, out into the cold morning. The air was crisp, sharp, but I felt more awake than I had in years. No one stopped me. No one called out. The silence didn't hurt this time. It felt like freedom. As the van pulled away, I didn't look back, not because I was trying to be strong, but because I didn't need to. My life was in the seat beside me, in the boxes behind me, in the small tin of seeds in my coat pocket, waiting to be planted again. The apartment was small, smaller than I had imagined when I first spoke to the landlord on the phone. A single room for living and sleeping, a tiny kitchen with just enough counter space for a kettle and a cutting board, and a narrow bathroom where the light came in soft and pale. But the balcony faced the morning sun. The first thing I did was sweep it clean, not because it was dirty, but because I wanted to make space for what would come next. I set out the little chair I'd brought with me, the one that used to overlook my garden, the seat that had once held both my body and my breath at the start of each day. Then I opened the tin. The seeds were small, almost weightless, but they carried years inside them, seasons, memory, love. I filled the pots with soil I bought from a hardware store down the street. Nothing special, just earth. But when I watered it, the fragrance rose, warm, familiar. And for a moment, I felt Henry beside me. Not as a ghost, not as grief, as presence. His trowel fit in my hand the way it always had, not like something returned to me, but something I had carried all along. The first sprout came a week later, a thin green shoot turning toward the light because that is what living things do when they are free to choose. I sat with it every morning, coffee in one hand, sun on my face, the quiet, steady, and kind. No footsteps rushing behind me, no whispered schedules, no tasks waiting, just breath, just sunlight, just life growing again. People sometimes ask if I regret leaving, if it was lonely, if I ever wished I had tried harder to make it work. But the truth is simple. I did try. I tried until there was nothing of me left to offer. And leaving wasn't losing. Leaving was returning to myself, to the part of me that knows how to tend things, gently, patiently, lovingly. Plants, memories, my own heart. My balcony is not a garden, not like the one I had, but the tomatoes grow just the same. And every morning I wake up in a place that belongs to me, a place where I am not helping, but living, where my hands smell of earth again, where my name means something, where I am not mom or grandma or help or guest, just Margaret. And that is more than enough.